Hi, welcome to today's webinar titled 10 Commandments for Lean in Government and Beyond. I'm Mark Graban, VP of Improvement and Innovation Services for KaiNexus, and today I'm very happy to be joined by Harry Kenworthy, who's going to be our presenter. So our presenter today, again, Harry Kenworthy, is Principal and Manager of the Quality and Productivity Improvement Center, or QPIC, a consulting organization he founded in 1984 and has been working with full-time since 2004. He worked with Dr. W. Edwards Deming in the 1980s on a series of two-day seminars throughout the United States. He's spoken at over 90 conferences on quality, productivity, lean, and Six Sigma. With a background in manufacturing, he was one of the first practitioners to apply lean in government in the mid-1990s. Harry's consulting work has included numerous government processes that have been improved by removing waste, reducing costs, or increasing revenues while reducing overall process cycle times and improving customer service. So he worked at Rogers Corporation, a global manufacturer, for 26 years, including his last 3 years as a corporate VP of manufacturing. He provided Rogers Six Sigma training in the US, Europe, and Asia. He's a certified Lean Six Sigma Master Black Belt, and for 9 years he was on the board of directors of a Japanese joint venture based in Japan, where that JV was a key supplier to Toyota, and he was able to learn about Lean directly from Toyota. So he has a BS in Materials Engineering from Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute and an MBA in Finance from Syracuse University. So I think that makes Harry uniquely positioned to give us a great webinar today. So I will hand it over to you.
Okay, thanks a lot, Mark. So we wanted to talk about lean in government, but it's far beyond that. I think I'd first like to say good afternoon, good evening, and good morning, because we've got a lot of folks from various parts of the world in attendance. I happen to be sitting in Rhode Island today, so we got a lot of parts of the world on here. We have done a lot of work previously with private companies. And I think what happened is, as we saw things increasing in 2004 and 2005, we got involved helping out a couple of government organizations on a pro bono basis. And then with the financial crisis of 2008 and 2009, it really accelerated the government activity. So we see right now our client base is about somewhere in the 97-98% range on the government side. We have cities, counties, a couple federal agencies, and also a lot of state agencies, along with some K-12 school systems. So these principles that I'm going to talk about today is what we've seen develop kind of over time. We would call these kind of the overarching principles that we see really make the most sense. So I wanted to go through them. I think all of you recognize good old Charlton Heston here, but we called it 10 Commandments. And so what we're going to cover is kind of a brief lean overview. My understanding is quite a few of you, as I looked at the list of attendees and the polling numbers we did to start with, quite a few people have some experience with lean, but we will do a kind of a brief overview. Then I wanted to go through the 10 Commandments end of it. So even though it says lean government, it really is more broader based than just government itself. But we will cover these 10 Commandments, and then a little bit of a section on what leaders need to do in terms of the organization, and the roles they play, what needs to go on there, and then a little bit on how to get started. So that's pretty much the game plan for today. And let me get started. So the lean overview. So it's really, I mean, this is, I think, makes a lot of sense to all of you, depending on your level of experience, but it really comes down to a relentless drive. And we want to remove waste and improve quality. That's really a key point for us, is that waste is paramount in the organizations. Lean identifies with waste. But we also utilize aspects of Six Sigma, too, because Six Sigma deals with variation. And the combination of both of these things, I think, is the right way to approach it, although lean clearly carries the heavier leverage. And then we do sprinkle in a little bit of we call Shannon techniques. These are specialized problem-solving techniques that Dorian Shannon popularized over probably the last 30 or 40 years. Dorian has since passed away. But there's some good information out on those techniques that I would encourage folks to take a look at as far as problem solving. Obviously, customers are primary, foremost out there. We really need to increase customer service. It doesn't matter what organization you're involved with, whether it's private sector or public sector. And as finally my friend Paul Akers talks about, fix what bugs you. So have people identify things that are really bugging them, and those are the processes that we really want to focus on and create some improvements. So we got the process here, and we've got the aspects of the people. And when we look at everything, I work with Dr. Deming, and Dr. Deming, 4 to 5 times a year over a span of 3 years, 2-day seminars sponsored by MIT. And Dr. Deming was always fond of saying, a poor process will win out over good people virtually all the time. So it's really, from our standpoint, we're talking about processes. And it's a tough transition for a lot of managers and supervisors to say we're really focused on the process. Management owns the process, and the people work in the process. And blaming people and not treating people with dignity and respect are huge issues in organizations. So process orientation is paramount. And another just a recap. What does Lean do? It really does reduce cost and waste. There's no question about that. It also goes ahead and increases service and capacity in the organization. So it's one of the true things that you can, in the government side of things, you truly do more with less. So if you take out waste out of the organization and wind up with more value added, then the people that you have are in a better position to provide even better services. Now, the other thing that's really impacting government at this stage is the attrition rate. So there is, depending on the organization, quite a few folks that are leaving the organization. And so we see attrition rates of 4 to 6% a year over the next several years. We talked to an organization just recently that they're expecting 55% of their people to retire in the next 5 years, which is huge. So you got to be in a position to wind up, doing, once again, being a lot more value added on your processes. And then really the major aspect, which becomes, I think, the big challenge for all organizations, is working on the culture. So the culture, in my definition, is the way we do things around here. That's the culture. And when you look at what's going on in organizations, very few organizations, when they do Lean or implement Lean or start a Lean journey, very few organizations get beyond the tool stage. We seem to be enamored with tools in the U.S., maybe elsewhere in the world, but also Kaizen events become very, very popular. The 3 to 5 day full-time event working on a good-sized project to make improvements, and people are energized doing that. They really enjoy them. They're able to get out their ideas, their frustrations, and make improvements and take ownership and have a lot of skin in the game. And unfortunately, we've seen examples where, one state agency we're aware of, they've been doing Kaizen events for 8 years using an outside consultant. And that, in my estimation, is crazy. I mean, you should be in a position within a year to a year and a half, even a year, after doing maybe 3 Kaizen events from an experience standpoint, being coached through them, to be in a position to be self-sufficient. So the overall objective, based on the drive of management and everything, would be to be self-sufficient in what's going on in the organization and be able to do these skills, provide this training, and provide this coaching really pretty much on your own. So if we get to this quote from Toyota, most important thing for Toyota is people. Toyota is all about teaching and training people and building a culture of continuous improvement. We don't care about the next hybrid, the next engineering marvel, not even the next sales strategy. And the key point is our number one concern is how to build our people and how to build a culture of continuous improvement. And I think, organizations sometimes, fall into the belief that Lean, this is a manufacturing thing. And it's really Toyota. It's what Toyota is doing. And Toyota builds cars, and cars don't relate to what we do. And really, that's so far away from reality. The focus of Toyota, from my firsthand experience and with a lot of folks we know in Japan is focusing on continuously building up the skill sets of your people. And if you can do that, and we'll cover some of this later, then you can wind up with some pretty tremendous results in the organization. So let me get into the heart of it. We'll talk about the 10 Commandments, what we call the 10 Commandments, but these are the things that I think are really essential in lean implementations. Now, there's obviously a lot of other things that go along with what I'm going to cover, but we see these as pretty much paramount areas. First one is hardly any surprise. It's first and foremost, what does the customer need? So we always, when we're working with government clients, and I'll say for government for a minute, but this applies to any organization, the first thing we try and do is say how easy it is for me to use your website, how easy it is for me to get to the necessary forms or information that I need to get to. And we see over and over again that clients haven't really had that experience. They just put things in place. We see things from a customer standpoint. Things should be designed to be at the 7th grade reading level for customers coming in. That's the general average reading level in the country. And yet the people that are building the websites and the forms and everything for the customer to interface with are designing them at the college level. And the reason for this is a lot of times there's legal staff that's involved, and there's legalese that goes in, and there's more complexity in the words and the sentences and the paragraphs, so it makes it more and more difficult for the customer to understand. So we always go in, like I said, to start with and say how easy it is to navigate the website. I don't know anything about the client's business per se, but if I have a complaint on, say, healthcare related to a health and services agency, what's my way of getting in there? How do I get to the right place in the website to get to the right people? As you know, sometimes you go into websites and you have if you want to contact somebody, through a phone call or something, it can be darn near impossible to figure out who those folks are and to get their phone numbers. So how easy is it to navigate the website? Is the information easy to read and understand? Back to the 7th grade versus college level type of wording that's in documents. Are there easy forms and checklists? People respond very well to checklists. We've seen an example in a motor vehicle department where the instructions were 8 pages long, and for guys that are registering their trucks to drive in the state for commercial transit, interstate transportation, that type of thing. And yet, 8 pages, they weren't going to go through that stuff, and it wound up being turned around to a 1-page checklist where the most important things were at the top. And then, it became a much easier process for people to fill out the information that was required and significantly improve or reduce the reject rework rates and significantly improve what we call right the first time. And as I covered before, make sure stuff is written really at a 7th grade level. We have this kind of true north model. I'm sure quite a few of you are familiar with that. There's several things here. This happens to be the Lean Leadership Institute, which we belong to, which Jeff Leiker was involved founding this. Jeff wrote a lot of books on Toyota and the Toyota way. But one of the first pillar in here is continuous improvement, and there's 3 aspects under that. But the first one is challenge. And what we mean by challenge is that setting good challenging goals. So if you had a process that took 60 days to complete, a challenge wouldn't be saying to the team, well, let's set it at 56. In our view, a challenge we have to think in terms of at least 50% improvements. So if it's 60 days, then let's make the challenge at 30. So what does that do? It gets people kind of energized and charged up about it. You might get some reactions to start with that, oh wow, this is impossible, we can't do this. But in reality, thinking about a 50% improvement, what it really drives is that you can't get that kind of improvement doing things the way you do now. The thinking of today won't get you to that kind of improvement. So it does drive people to think, differently. Use the lean tools, obviously, to get there. And I'll show we really want to pick leverage. So leverage for us is, go through a process that you've identified projects. You come up with a rating grid for criteria that's of most interest to you, and then pick the things that have the greatest leverage. So I guess my number one favorite word is always leverage. Pick the things that have greatest leverage. And my number two favorite word is data. So you got to have good data too, and we'll spend a little time on data as we go through this, but leverage is very key. The third item I want to talk about is really Kaizen, continuous improvement. So you've got Kaizen events and you've got daily Kaizen, and this is just an example of a team and a state agency. But teammates have ideas and frustrations to tap into, and if those of you who have done Kaizen events, it's not unusual to find folks that say, wow, I've had these ideas, I've been frustrated about this for years, but I've never, nobody's listened to me, and I've never had a venue to basically present these things and get something done about it. And here was the venue that did that. I went through this Kaizen event, I was very actively engaged, and boom, look at all this stuff we got accomplished, look at these action items going forward. Unfortunately, what happens with organizations is, people come out of a Kaizen event saying, wow, this is great. Why can't we do this all the time? And a lot of organizations will flip the switch, have a Kaizen event, everybody will be excited about it, and then what we call going back to business as usual. We will do things the way we've always done them, so the culture is not making that shift. We're using some tools, and Kaizen is a very powerful tool, the Kaizen event, the longer event, 3 to 5 days, and more importantly, to get into daily Kaizen, we happen to call that dynamic idea generation. And there's some good books out there by Alan Robinson and Dean Schroeder who talk about ideas are free and other things related to idea generation. But you want to be in a position to do this where people are actively engaged, not only coming up with the idea, but really developing the idea and carrying it through. So there's less of an onus on the supervisor the ideas normally get handed off. Person has an idea, boom, it's given directly to the supervisor. We don't want that to happen. We want the employee to be actively engaged with the idea process all the way through. A good example of that is Virginia Mason Hospital up in Seattle. They've been able to have a very robust idea generation system. And the numbers here, which some folks in Schroeder and Robinson talk about, is that the normal acceptance rate of ideas from people are about one idea for every 8 people per year, and that's in a suggestion system. And their drive, what we look for is 1 idea per employee per month implemented. That's a tremendous difference from a suggestion system, which we kind of call really rejection systems because they really don't work very well. So ideas, clearly key. Learning to see. Now we talk about that in a Kaizen event. People will go out there, take a look at the process, see all the steps that are going on, talk to people, get the forms, get the value added, the non-value added, especially deal with rework and errors. And just as an aside, I would really emphasize in government, from a government standpoint, and maybe certainly in other sectors, many times we really don't know what's the rework and error rate, and yet it could be huge. We've seen error rates of 75, 80, 90% levels, rework levels that come out of that. So those are, a huge amount of waste associated with that. So if you can imagine a process that has a one-page form, which we've seen in a government agency, that comes in with a 77% error rate in it. Imagine how incredible that is. What must have to go on to track down people to get the right information. So follow this process. And we recommend also that if you're in a managerial position, pretend, if you can, and we would encourage you to do this, take a half a day or a day off and spend that time in a key process that's currently maybe not working too well or that's really keeping you up at night, and start at the very beginning of the process and walk through it step by step with all the touch points. Ask a ton of open-ended questions. Understand the value-added, the non-value-added. Develop a mini swim lane map if you can. Develop a little spaghetti diagram to show the flow of the work. Take a look at how well the work is balanced. Get a copy of the forms. Take copies of the computer screens and look at the screens and be able to document the errors and rework that's going on even related to those screens. So being able to do that, you will see stuff you don't believe is happening. You will see stuff that I thought we eliminated that 3 years ago. Well, a lot of times the transfer of knowledge between employees doesn't go that well. So somebody could be working on something that got eliminated several years ago, but they don't know that, and they're working really hard at it. So being able to see is really critical. Another goal for us is one-stop shopping. So here's the deal with one-stop shopping. Normally we have batch processing. So batch processing is, as a lot of you know, is not good. Normally people think this is good. So we just accumulate a bunch of materials or forms or things that we have to do in our work center, and then when we get enough of them accumulated, then we'll just process all those same things through at one time. So that happens, but at the same time, everything else is backing up because you're processing that one batch. And if that isn't balanced through your organization, then the next people down the line who might have a very a quicker process processing the information, they're just sitting and waiting to get stuff because it's all bottled up in the process from a batch standpoint. So going to one-piece flow is really a good first step to get to. That requires the value added to be looked at and the non-value added, and to eliminate the non-value added. A lot of times when we see organizations that things are increasing as far as volume and we need to hire more people. Well, that's not the solution until we know, what's the value added and what's the non-value added in the area. And also, once we've eliminated the non-value added, a lot of it, then get into a situation where we can balance actually the workload between the process steps so we get a much smoother flow. And of course, what we drive for is the best option is what we call one-stop shopping. Being in a position where the customer comes in the door over the phone and they can contact one person, and that one person, without doing handoffs, winds up taking care of all their needs. Now, that may require, in some cases, job restructuring and involving of unions to get involved with that and understand. But that's really the best. All of us as a customer, we'd love to go to an agency like a DMV and just talk to one person and get a lot of business done on the spot. And ideally, hopefully, get it all done over the internet so we don't even have to go in. But the ideal state is really drive to one-stop shopping. So we emphasize that a lot. How do you get to one-stop shopping? What's keeping us from getting there? And then dealing with those obstacles. More special related to government is statutes, laws, and ordinances. Now, there's tons of these things. I think the first thing you wind up doing is saying, in the legislation, and I'll use a saying I like to say, legislation is really a bunch of elegant solutions that were applied to a misunderstood problems. And if you think about that, a lot of times we don't do a good job of really defining what is the real problem. And I'll emphasize that a couple more times as we go through here. So in the course of problem solving, this is the most important step and consumes the most time for everybody to get involved and to have a consensus of what is the real problem we're trying to work on. And once we have that real problem, we can move pretty fast after that. So you got, first of all, laws that can overlap, statutes, ordinances, interpretations morph over time. People are involved with these, and you know, one person was working on it for a while, they transferred their knowledge to somebody else. All of a sudden, the law or the statute is now morphing and being misinterpreted, and that can lead you some pretty interesting areas of waste and rework. So we want to make sure we don't add controls and interpret policy. We want to make sure we've got an opportunity to stay on task here. So when we go into government and look at a particularly, say, a Kaizen event, one of the key slides for us is what are the laws, statutes, and ordinances that pertain to this particular process. We want to look at those first. And clients will sometimes tell us, oh, we're doing all that. We're following all those things to the letter of the law. And our view is, okay, we understand that, but let's just take it out, take a look at it, and make sure that's the case. And I can only tell you, I don't have the statistics exactly, but I know it's well north of 50% of the time that what is in the law, statute, and ordinance is not exactly what we're doing, and there's waste that's being introduced as a result of that. And clients get really amazed at how far these things can go adrift. Benchmarking. Well, we put the quote, steal shamelessly but legally. So benchmarking is a key thing to do. In government and schools, it's easy to do, and you must do that. Learn from others. Don't improve a process, an existing process, when you can learn and find out how other folks do the same process. They may get you to a newer, higher plateau to begin improvement from there. It's more difficult in the private sector. I mean, when I was in the private sector, it'd be difficult for me to go to my competitor and ask them, gee, how'd you introduce this new product that we're going to compete with? But in the public sector, it's wide open, and it's easy. And the thing that blows me away is a lot of folks just don't do that. They're working in kind of their own silo as an agency or a department, and they're not reaching out to other cities, for example, and getting that input. So benchmarking is very, very key, something we always do in a Kaizen event. Something that's, I think, relatively unique to what we do is look at, we call it dynamic data collection to eliminate errors and rework. As I mentioned before, it's really, errors and rework are extremely high in a lot of situations, and most of the time you don't even know what it is. Even when we ask for data with clients, we say, how are you doing? How do people know how they're doing? And we don't very often get good answers on that. And sometimes we get blank stares, and so the people working in the process don't know the outcomes that are expected. They don't know how they're doing, and as a result, you get losing productivity right there. So we're looking to get to simple systems to collect and see data daily by the people working in the process. So you want to be in a situation where you can have people collecting their own data, capturing it, and displaying it in the work area so they start thinking about this. And so what are the benefits you get out of doing this? Well, the benefits are people are a heck of a lot more engaged in terms of what's going on in the process. So they've got data now, very simple data. I'll give you a couple examples. And they can see what's happening. And in some cases, it might verify exactly what they've been saying of things that need to change and improvements that need to be made. But now it's more visible and it's there. And it also gives them the opportunity to say, hey, I think I know what's causing this. I think I know what we can do to improve this. And so you get more engagement from people. This is probably one of my really top favorite areas in terms of having this dynamic data collection that's going on. I'll show you a couple examples. This happens to be an example of safety, Public Works Department. So, what would normally happen in safety is that, people are saying, hey, we got to be safer, and we're publishing 8.5 by 11 Excel spreadsheet and maybe 10-point font of safety performance, or the supervisor gets up once a month and says, hey, here's the accidents we're having, or even when an accident does take place, all the employees are called together for a quick meeting to say, here's what's happened. So take that situation and compare it to this. This is where you've actually got on display, a lot of times near time clocks or in a prominent area where people would see in the organization. Here's a display of accidents that have happened. And this is just one example, but these are concentration diagrams. Folks, I can only emphasize that concentration diagrams you should be using more and more. The more you get them, the better clues they generate of where the problems are. They are a big means of really cutting back on brainstorming, fishbone diagrams, affinity diagrams, which we view as organized guesswork. Let the data lead you in the direction from countermeasure standpoint. So what you see here is a clear display of here's what's happening. Here's the type of injuries that are taking place, and it's even coded colors for green for days and red for nights. And now the employees see this and they're more sensitive to, wow, be more careful. Here's the areas that people are getting hurt. And beyond that, what's causing this to happen? In this particular case, it was a northeast city, and they had shifted gears from buying sand, for spreading manually on streets from 25 on sidewalks, from 25-pound bags to 50-pound bags. And more of the people on days were more senior people. So the folks identified, and they even said at the time when the salt was being purchased, that this stuff is too heavy to handle. And purchasing got a little bit better deal on it, saved a little money, and so the voices weren't really being heard. This display, along with the employee inputs, really made that come home. This is another example. This is Boca Raton. If you look at the period of time up there, it's basically 17th of March through the 28th. If you take into account some weekends in there days, it's probably in the neighborhood of 9 to 10 working days. And all they did is they had a lot of problems with accounts payable. So they said, okay, let's just track the data that's coming through. They basically kind of protected the departments, didn't put department names up there, but they also came up front with people and said, look, this isn't an exercise for gotchas or pointing the fingers at people or anything like that. What we really want to do is understand the data. This is all about the data and the process. If we can understand that, then we can go about making some improvements. And obviously, here's a period of time that's pretty short. And errors that were coming into accounts payable, there was 169 errors, even in that time frame. So, and as you look at what's there, it's, obviously, if you go back to the keyword leverage, if you got Department 3 with 93 of 169, and you can make improvements there, you just made you made more than a 50% improvement in what's happening in your error rate. And, oh, by the way, you can see invoice sent to the department first instead of accounts payable, 55. So having the data, once again, not to blame people or point the fingers, but having the data is, it gets away from the opinions of people and says, here's the facts. And the facts cause people to say, how can we do this better? What are the improvements? What are the things that can be changed? So it's concentration diagrams, once again, emphasized from my standpoint, are big time. Number 9, a lot of you are doing this, which is 5S everywhere. 5S is very simple, easy to understand. People get this quickly, and the overall thing, you've got the areas up here. There's Japanese words for this, but it's sort, straighten, shine, standardize, and sustain. And of course, there's always the 6th S, which is safety. We must think in terms of safety when we're doing all these things. So why do you do 5S? And there's a whole variety of reasons. I mean, the main thing is that people waste time trying to find things. So if you look at this list, eliminate waste, standardize improvements, quality, safety, productivity, but bottom line is find stuff quickly. So maybe that's the 7th S, stuff, but find stuff quickly. I'll give you an example there. We work with a federal agency that had a very large campus with a lot of buildings, 500 plus employees in maintenance. And we gave them 3 hours of training on the first day about 5S and visual controls. And then 2.5 days they went into various buildings on site and started with some coaching working on 5S. And over the course of doing that over 3 separate months, 1 session each month, about 30 employees of the 500 were involved. So at the end of 3 months, 90 were involved. And working on the buildings, they were able to achieve just about a 20% productivity improvement because they could find stuff easily and get rid of stuff and get rid of some excess inventory. So a lot of gains were being made through that. And it was very simple, very straightforward. Now, the last one, I'll get into leadership a little bit, is developing great leaders. So the question is, how do you learn? And, I don't know about you guys, but I play golf, and I'm still working on it with about an 18 handicap. And if it was that easy, I'd read Jack Nicklaus's book over the weekend, and I'd be out shooting par on Monday, but it isn't that easily. So you really got to learn, we view is you can't teach or coach someone who doesn't want to learn, first of all. So, try as you might, one of the first questions is, do you really want to learn how to do this differently? Or do you want to really learn these techniques? Or do you want to learn how to be a good coach? And then we're a firm believer in Mike Rother's approach, the kata approach. And I think Rother's definition is really, really spot on. A new behavior that is converted into a new permanent habit through deliberate practice. And I would add, and coaching. So I think, putting people in front of a training session for supervisory training and say, well, they've got them all trained now, they can go forth and be great supervisors, that is so off the mark. You've got to have the emphasis on practice and coaching. And then, you can't train people to embrace a new habit. It just doesn't happen. They've got to have that practice. They got to have that coaching and reinforcement from management or their leader, their supervisor, and then they'll get there. So what leaders need to do, just to cover that a little bit, coaching is a fundamental that's not, I think, not utilized that much out there. We work with folks, and when you go into organizations, people develop their model of being a supervisor by basically the mentors they had. And the mentors they had in a lot of cases where people told folks what to do. I'm the smart person in the room, so I'll tell you what to do. Coaching is where you want to develop people to be able to have the necessary skill sets. And from a lean standpoint, our view is leader must have 3 really fundamental areas. Number 1 is the ability to coach, which they need a lot of feedback on, they need a lot of practice on, to develop that into a new behavior. The second one is to really work with their people from a coaching standpoint on having their people understand waste. And so these are the forms of waste. There's other interpretations of waste, and at the bottom we've got a couple acronyms, TIMWOOD or downtime, which will help people remember. But the key thing here also is to make sure that the supervisor or the leader of that particular team is proficient in these areas themselves. They can't just dump it off to the employee and say, hey, I want you to work on this stuff. They have to be able to practice and lead by example themselves. And by doing that, now they can demonstrate to their employees that they're into it, they've got skin in the game, they understand this stuff, and now they're an ability, because of their practice and their experience, to really help their people and coach their people on understanding waste. And then the other aspect is really looking at a plan, do, check, act, a problem-solving process. And it can be A3s. They're certainly very important. They're another approach that can be taken. It's an easy approach with employees to utilize. But utilizing this type of process, once again, it has to start with PDCA or A3s with the leader. And we define the leader as anybody who has people reporting to them. So it can be any level in the organization. The leader has to be able to be proficient in these areas. They have to practice the plan, do, check, act cycle of problem solving, or they have to practice utilizing an A3 and solving a problem and posting that for their employees to see. And once again, by having this practice and proficiency, they're now in a lot better position to train and coach their employees to develop the same skill sets. And they're modeling the behaviors because the behaviors are now becoming a habit for them. But once again, if you look first and foremost up here, if you get clarifying the problem on the plan side is the number one thing. And I mentioned that previously, but you know, there's so much time spent with people just saying, hey, I got this problem in a meeting, and you maybe have a half a dozen people around the table, and now next thing you know, what's happening? People are firing solutions out. Well, did all 6 people in that meeting have the same understanding of what was the problem we're talking about? And I would submit that if you did write it down on a piece of paper, what the problem is, you'd get 6 different answers. So fundamentally to this problem-solving process, whether it be A3 is more individual related, PDCA could be both individual and group related, but clarifying the problem is so important. And the other thing I would emphasize here, we have this little red box. Ensure there's a good measurement system. So we see in A3s, we see in PDCA processes that people start whipping through the whole process and they haven't really fundamentally understood if they got a good measurement system. Does it pass a gauge R&R? Does it pass it for attributes? Does it pass it for databases? So discrete and continuous data. So can we make sure that if, say, as a social worker that's going out to the field, will 3 social workers make the same judgment when they interview a person in their home as far as what level of service they should get? Because if that isn't a good measurement system, then you have data that's going to be all over the place. And the difference in that data, like let's take the social worker example, somebody could say this person needs Meals on Wheels in their home, and another person could say this person needs 7x24 nursing home care. And the cost differences between those 2 things are just enormous. So measurement systems, I just emphasize, make sure measurement systems are good. If you're doing A3s, make sure the measurement system is good. Okay, so that's the pretty much the fundamentals going through. I wanted to cover how to get started. We see the bottom of this chart, we have what's called a proven path, but that's because it's proven, because folks have done it. And we also know all the other areas that have been tried and have not worked out well. So starting out with demonstration, that gives, starting with top management training, we will walk away from client situations if the top management really doesn't want to go through the training themselves. It's a natural progression, but top management goes through training along with some internally selected coach candidates, and then they are doing some Kaizen events. And that creates the knowledge, at least from a government standpoint, to say it's a low-cost approach, but it creates the knowledge to say now I can write an RFP or an RFQ as to what I really want to get done. And then you have, going up above, you have the tools phase where now coaches are being brought on board to learn the skill sets, and you're starting to get this transfer of knowledge into the city or the county or agency or the school system, and how to use these tools, coupled with some of the culture phase, setting up a steering committee, making sure a steering committee is in place, starting to go through metrics of what we call accountability mapping, where vision, mission, and values are developed, along with what are the key outcomes that support those, and then the metrics that go along with that. So those things, I mean, it's a progression if there's a really good leadership buy-in and commitment. And we call commitment, we always use the story, it's like ham and eggs. The pig was committed and the chicken was involved. And in reality, management has got to be committed. It becomes a common catchphrase. But if folks are just making cameo appearances, don't know how to use the tools, aren't leading by example, then you're going to have a lot of, you're going to have a lean effort that's going to be tools-based, and maybe it'll be somewhat sustainable, or maybe it will kind of go by the wayside because management has come up with another great thing to work on. So that's really the demonstration. I mean, the whole proven path end of it is start with tools, but move up into culture. So we've covered the first three, and then the respect for people, which we've really been covering since, as far as the coaching and everything, is really fundamental. So you got the tools, we view as 15 to 20%, and the culture being 80 to 85% of successful implementations. Just a couple other things to touch on. We do have a website. I would encourage you to go there. It's called leangovcenter.com, and there's an area in there called Lean Projects, one of the tabs. And under Lean Projects, you'll see vetted websites throughout the country with government activities. And this is a government site, so all the folks that are vetted on there, organizations that are vetted, are government related, but you can drill into that. You can see training materials that people are using. You can see Kaizen events. You can see their metrics, how they're setting those up, accountability mapping. So there's a ton of great examples that you can access there for information. There's a lot of other information on there, presentations, etc. But and we do webinars too. But I think that's just a resource area. And if you are doing some really good stuff, and you're on this webinar right now, in the area of lean initiatives, and you've got a good initiative going with the website, let us know, and we'll check it out. And if you guys are doing good stuff and it's alive and well and good material there, then we'll put it up on our website as something else people can access. So to summarize, it's really developing an organization of continuous improvement through the relentless elimination of waste. And this little quote from Katie, get rid of stuff that bugs you. So that's pretty much what I had to cover today. Mark, you want to kind of take over?
Sure. Harry, thank you very much. We'll invite people to submit questions. Got a few details to cover before we'll get to that. But Harry, thank you very much for sharing a lot of great tips and wisdom there. I can, as somebody listening to what you're presenting, I can see the connection in your career from both Dr. Deming and from Toyota, and really want to thank you for presenting material I think is really helpful to people regardless of the industry that they're in, and we know we had a great mix of people here today. One thing I'll mention, I'm sorry?
I said we were honored to do it.
Yeah, well, thank you. And for those of you who signed in early, we did an experiment with a bit of a poll. We only had about 25 people respond, asking people how long they are into their lean journey, and 48% of the people who responded said 3 to 5 years or more. 10% said 1 to 2 years, 20% said about a year, and 31% said they're either just starting or thinking about it. So it's kind of what's the inverse of a bell curve, Harry? You're the Six Sigma guy. I think people can picture what that curve looks like. I think it was kind of a split distribution, and I think hopefully something for everybody. But would invite you to take a look at our webinars on demand. If this is the first KaiNexus webinar that you've attended, we do these about monthly. There's a really good archive of presentations out there. If you go to KaiNexus.com, look under the menu for webinars on demand. Our next webinar is not in October. It's actually a week from today. We get 2 of them here in September. September 20th, Erin Edwards from Four Seasons Produce. They have been a customer of KaiNexus for a couple of years now. She's going to be sharing some of their lean journey. They are a fresh produce distributor, which I think creates an interesting learning environment because they also don't make cars. They're a very different type of business, as are people in healthcare and government, and she's going to talk about turning continuous improvement and a PMO, a program management office, into an innovation team. So we'd invite you to register at kainexus.com/webinars. And here is everyone's contact info. And we've got questions coming in. So Harry, here's a question from Jen. How have you dealt with staff members who add a lot of value to the organization, but they're resistant to get on board with using lean tools?
Well, I think in terms of they should be involved in the process, obviously. We've gone through examples where projects of people that have come into the project saying, I don't know why I'm here, this won't work, that type of thing. But I think the more they're engaged, and brought into the process as far as tapping into their ideas and frustrations, and they're realizing that they're going to have a voice and they will be heard. There's a lot of change management strategies out there. Obviously, John Carter's website, for example, if you go into John Carter, who's out of Harvard, that's Kotter, he's got a lot of information on there with, I think there's like a 24 question series if people can say, here's my level of resistance or here's why I don't want to do this. And John provides a whole series of answers there, which I find to be pretty helpful as an example. But it's getting them engaged and saying, hey, we value their inputs. They're an important person to have at the table. And, certainly you'll find going through this process, John, that by your involvement, we'll get some really great stuff done and you'll be heard and, a lot of positive things will come out of it. And then also tied in with that would be something we call an elevator speech. What are we doing? Why are we doing it? What do you expect out of me and what's in it for me? Those 4 key bullets so that people understand going in what this is all about with a project or a lean effort.
Yeah, and I would also invite people on the topic of our past webinars on demand. We hosted one in June. Dr. Mark Graban, a physician, it was called The Science Behind Resistance to Change, what the research says and how it can help you. He shared a lot that was really helpful, and I think, Harry, you nailed it. You involve people. I think people are resistant to change that's forced upon them, but through Kaizen, through PDCA, through Kaizen events, you get people involved and help them participate in defining problems, coming up with solutions to test. We had another question that came in actually from one of the attendees via Twitter, and he's live on the webinar. That's slow coming up, so I'm going to come to that question next. There's a question here about commandment number 7 on benchmarking from Kathleen. When thinking about the commandment, are you mostly thinking about stealing shamelessly from others doing things that can help you, or does your organization also use benchmarking for setting goals, or both? How do you see the role of those benchmarks? As you said, sometimes people say benchmarking leads to you rising up to be the cream of the crop. What are your thoughts about that?
My response there would be to both, but I think it's such an advantage to be able to do that. Working, for example, with a school system, last I knew there was, and I was a Baldrige examiner in the past, there were 6 K through 12 school systems that won the Baldrige National Award. So if you're doing stuff in your school and you want to have some improvement projects and you're thinking about some Kaizen events, why not tap into that base and find out what they've been doing? And when we've done that sometimes, and I remember one Kaizen event we were doing in a school, and we tapped into the Baldrige base and said, hey, what have you been doing in this area? And all of them universally said, we're really interested in what you guys are going to do. So I thought that was pretty interesting. But, sharing and learning from each other, I think the main advantage from benchmarking from our standpoint is it establishes a higher level from what you can start from. That'd be my full comment on benchmarking.
Okay. So here's a question from Twitter, the website reloaded here finally, from John. Do you have any tips or things to watch out for when it comes to the 5S of information?
Well, there's the 5S of information. GFOA, the Government Finance Officers Association, has a series of papers out on how to really 5S shared drives, 5S, your own computer emails, all that type of stuff. You got my contact information in here, hwk455@comcast.net. So, if you send me an email to that address, I can send you the GFOA materials as far as really how to best handle that. And it's clearly, how do you, as you know, finding stuff, sometimes it becomes very hard to find files. And do people use a uniform process to store things, or does everybody have their own particular approach? So very very good question.
Mm-hmm. Another question, we hear this a lot with daily continuous improvement, and you bring up the idea of staff participating in data collection. What happens when you get into that kind of common situation where people say, look, we're too busy, we don't have time to collect data?
Yeah, well, I think the thing with the daily data collection is it has to be simple. So we're looking at, if you saw the concentration diagram a while back there, the example with injuries, or if you saw the data collection thing with Boca Raton that I covered, it's a check sheet that you're putting together, basically a horizontal and a vertical axis, and you may have, what are the errors that are coming up, and say what are the departments or functions that it's coming from as the other axis, and then all you're asking people to do is take a pencil in that little grid and just mark a line. And once you get 4 lines, the 5th line goes across, and you got 5. So the ability to collect data that way, as opposed to, the last thing we want to do is build an IT system around this. The ability to collect data that way has to be very simple and easy to do. And so when we do data systems with clients using that particular approach, whether it be concentration diagrams, checklist, you might have a distribution, histogram distributions, that type of thing. It has to be something that's, it's a simple grid. They can just make a tick mark on it, and you're talking, a second or two. So it's not, a detailed, fill out the form, explain everything that's going on. It has to be very strongly visual and very easy to do.
Yeah, and I think the same thing applies for daily continuous improvement. That's one of the things we focus on here at KaiNexus is making the software really easy to use, and like any Kaizen process, even if it's bulletin boards, it should be simple and right at people's fingertips and easy to use. One more question here. Do you have thoughts on how to help people get better at clarifying the problem? Like you said, we spend so much time jumping to solutions, and we even jump to knowing what the problem is.
Yeah, I think the main thing, I always like Stephen Covey's example, one of his 7 points: seek first to understand, then to be understood. So the best thing to do, at least when we've seen, is that if somebody has a defined problem, then take a whiteboard or a sheet of flip chart paper and write the problem up there, and then invite discussion and clarification and all that stuff. Just to kind of give you a quick aside on that, it's interesting. In the case of, say, union relations and grievances, you can bring 5 union members into a meeting, just the same take on this, and say, what's the grievance? And the union president might say, hey, this is the grievance. And using the technique of saying, okay, let me write this up there and make sure I understand it, if I got it right, and then the other members start saying, no, that's not it. And so that whole process will get you to the point of having a consensus that, yes, that indeed is the problem that we're working on. So I'd say flip charts, whiteboards, writing it down, going around, getting clarification. There's the old deal. It's working slow is working fast. So doing that is really critical.
Yeah, and what I hear you describing reminds me of your point from earlier. I mean, somebody can't just read a book and say, oh, right, I'm going to stop jumping to solutions and stop jumping to knowing what the problem is. I mean, this is here. You and I, as 2 consultants, would agree with our backgrounds and biases, but this is where having some coaching can really be helpful, because I've seen people struggle with this, and they sometimes need someone to point out, okay, wait a minute, time out. Even though you're at the flip charts here, you're still jumping to solutions, right?
Oh, yeah. Solutions. Well, that's the same thing as Six Sigma. The Six Sigma sequence is called DMAIC, which is define, measure, analyze, improve, and control. And the first part of define is what is the problem, project charter, those types of things. And what happens in most organizations is you don't do the problem too well. Next thing you know, you're into the improve phase. So you've already skipped through measure and analyze because, hey, man, we already know the solution. Let's go on. Let's get out with it.
Well, and speaking of let's get on with it, we are out of time here at the top of the hour. So, Harry, thank you so much for sharing your thoughts today, and thank you to everybody who attended and asked questions. Again, we'll be back here September 20th with a webinar by Aaron Edwards of Four Seasons Produce, and our presenter today has been Harry Kenworthy. Thank you to everybody, and we'll see you next time.